Total War Warhammer has been confirmed, sort of. Not quite an official confirmation, but in an art book for the Total War series, there is the mention of a Warhammer Fantasy Total War video game, which has got quite a few people riled on the forums, and a lot of people excited because Total War Warhammer game is what a lot of people have been asking for a long time. I'm not sure why some people have been asking for a space game, because that just wouldn't work with the Total War model. A fantasy game though, that would work. The 40k universe is a lot more popular, especially among video gamers, because of the Dawn of War series and other video games that have been made for the 40k universe. But for the fantasy universe, there haven't been that many video games. The game I'm playing right here in the background is Warhammer Mark of Chaos, which is a good enough game, but not a great game or an exceptional game. Certainly nothing that stands out as being unique. In fact, the gameplay is very similar, not to Total War, but to Warhammer Shadow of the Horned Rat, which was released in 1995, which shares some similarities with the Total War series in terms of having large-scale battles with dozens of units, each unit being made of multiple soldiers. But it was very much a Warhammer game. And for a Total War Warhammer game to work, there need to be changes from the regular Total War formula. And I'm here to talk about what we should hope for in a Total War Warhammer game. In fact, what we should hope for is that Creative Assembly wasn't lying when they said that their regular team was working on just historical games and that other teams were working on other games in the company. Because I really don't want the historical team to work on a Warhammer game, because they're incompetent fucking idiots. I don't have a very good opinion about them. It's not Rome 2 that has ruined my opinion about them. It's the fact that ever since Medieval 2 has come out, every fucking game that they've made has been practically bullshit. It's like, oh, Shogun 2 is such an exceptional game. No, Shogun 2 is a piece of crap in many, many ways. Sure, it was the least buggy of all the games that they released since Medieval 2, but that's not saying much. That's not a high note for Creative Assembly. I personally detested Shogun 2, and I had plenty of issues in terms of stability and bugs with that game. Mind you, I did enjoy it to a certain degree, but I also absolutely loathed it and actually was bored with it to a large extent, to a much larger extent than anything else. I was really bored with it because every fucking faction was similar to one another. It's like, oh, but it's an interesting time period. Yes, the historical time period of Shogun 2 is actually interesting, but that's not represented in the video game at all very well. It's just factions of the same units fighting each other. Well, thankfully, Warhammer has very different factions that behave differently, and that's one of the main points that needs to be done well in a Warhammer game. To talk about the battles, factions don't just have different kinds of units, they fight very, very differently. They have different tactics, different abilities, they have different strengths and weaknesses. So we need these factions to not just fight each other in a very similar way. We need to fight these factions to fight each other in, well, asymmetric warfare. That's what we need in a Total War Warhammer game. Asymmetric warfare. If we don't have that, then it's just not going to work. Let me explain why. The Empire is very much like a Renaissance type state. It has state troopers, and then it has it has professional armies of handgunners, of cannons, of halberdiers, great swords, swordsmen, knights. It has various knightly orders and the like. So it's very much a Holy Roman Empire army. Then you've got Bretonia, which is very much a medieval army in the sense that it has very strong knights, but it also relies on peasant levies, and they don't have gunpowder units at all. Then you've got the dwarves, who also rely a lot on muskets and handgunners, but also have their own unique twists to their army. Grudge throwers and slayers as examples. Then there's chaos with their demons. Then there's the orcs with their mighty melee units. Every faction fights differently. That's the point. Every faction has their own unique units, and that needs to be represented very well in a Warhammer game, or else you just get a Total War game with some Warhammer skins, which would piss off a lot of people. That's why Call of Warhammer is something that just doesn't work. Yes, it's a decent enough mod, but it's just Total War with Warhammer skins. Seriously, don't go there, Creative Assembly. Just don't go there. Another thing we need, collision detection. This is something that people have complained about a lot with Rome 2, and I fully agree with it. And we need collision detection on the same level as in Medieval 2 or the original Rome. Actually, we need better, because Creative Assembly also would have to take into account the gigantic units like the demons, the ogres, the trolls. You know, an ogre should be sweeping aside smaller infantrymen with one strike. It shouldn't just be striking each of them individually. That's what we need in a Warhammer game. Also, there's flying units, there's tanks. Yes, there are steam tanks in the Warhammer universe made by the Empire. For the glory of Sigmar, we have steam tanks. Those need to be represented well inside of Warhammer game. Then there's magic units, mages of various orders, of various factions. That also needs to be represented well inside of game, how magic works. Total War has a problem in the sense that ranged units generally tend to be a lot more powerful than they should be. So tune that down by a significant amount, tune down artillery in terms of the damage it does. Not in terms of accuracy, but in terms of damage arrows do, in terms of ranged units in general should do less damage. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be useful, but their impact should be significantly less than in a regular Total War game, because that's how it works in Warhammer as well. Don't think about elven armies made up of archers. That's just not how it works. There's plenty of melee units in elven armies. Actually, the elves rely mostly on, well, the greatest power that the elves have, besides their fucking eagles, is their mages. They have very, very powerful mages that they rely on a lot. Not to say that they don't have other good units, they certainly do. They have good cavalry, they have good archers, they have good melee units as well. They have some very legendary melee units. But yeah. Another thing, underground fighting. In Warhammer, there is underground fighting. In fact, you might be fighting a battle on the surface, while on the underground, your units might be fighting through tunnels. And that should be actually an important thing, that you might win the battle underground and then pop up with your army behind the enemy force and flank it. That should be there in Warhammer. The Skaven especially are specialists in this. They have an underground empire, a huge underground empire, and they excel in terms of underground fighting. But they're not the only ones. The orcs also fight underground, the dwarves as well. They all fight underground, and that needs to be done well in a Warhammer game. Lastly, customization of units. And I'm not talking here about just visual customizations. In fact, I think that's pretty irrelevant, though I know some people will probably care a lot about that. But I'm talking here about being able to customize units on a gameplay level, with gameplay impact. We did get army customization from Rome 2, and I can certainly see some influence there. You can see, you know, when you look at Attila, when you look at Rome 2, you see certain things that just would work well in a Warhammer game. You see the Scorched Earth ideas, the horde mode, army integrity in Attila, you see the army customization, army leveling up. All these things would work well in Warhammer, but we need more than that. We need customization on an individual unit level. A unit might have a champion, it has a history of battles. It, you know, and each unit should be different, or, you know, in some way it should be different than another unit. It shouldn't just be cookie cutter units, because that's not how Warhammer works. There's a huge emphasis on unit customization in Warhammer that goes beyond just visual customization, although there's also that. Finally, heroes. Yes, heroes need to be in a Warhammer game. Without heroes, you've got nothing. Like, without heroes, Warhammer is not Warhammer. Champions of the gods fighting each other. A chosen of Sigmar, or Sigmar reincarnated in the form of Valten, for those of you that know your Warhammer lore, fighting against the ever-chosen of the gods in single combat until one dies. Or one flees, because yes, that's also a possibility. In fact, it does happen more often than not that one hero flees the battle. Mark of Chaos does have something like this, where you can you do have heroes, and you can engage in duels where other units don't interfere, and you can flee a duel if you so desire, if you feel you're losing. And we should certainly have this in a Total War Warhammer video game. The way heroes are handled in Warhammer, and I mean this in the tabletop and in every Warhammer Fantasy video game, is that you can attach heroes to individual units and they give bonuses to those units. That's how heroes should be handled in a Warhammer Total War game. Not, say, in Shogun 2, where heroes have small units surrounding them. That just won't work. No, allow us to attach them to individual units at our will and detach them in the middle of battle if we so desire. Mark of Chaos did this fairly well, though I have certain disagreements with how the duel system works in Warhammer Mark of Chaos. Anyway, that's just on the battle level. Engine-wise, 64-bit, collision detection, better graphics, and do, for the love of God, include blood and gore. Because if you're not going to include blood and gore, then Khorne will not be pleased. Do you want to piss off the Blood God, Creative Assembly, and all his fans? You really don't want to piss off the Blood God. You don't want to go there. Don't give me your bullshit Blood and Gore DLC crap that you have going for the Total War series. Blood and Gore in Warhammer Total War, or get the fuck out, essentially. Campaign level, that's the biggest problem. The campaign of, or the strategic map, the campaign map of a regular Total War game just wouldn't work in a Warhammer game. First off, underground maps. We need that. That's something that's pretty huge in Warhammer. There's entire underground cities in Warhammer, and that needs to be represented in Warhammer as well. Underground maps with, a surface map as well. And you can advance in the underground, you can advance on the surface. Not every faction can, not every unit should be able to, though there's some pretty huge underground units as well, like the Rat Ogres. But regular Ogres probably wouldn't fit in some tunnels. Beyond that, well, there's other things. The way you manage an economy, you control a faction in Total War wouldn't work in Warhammer. If you were to somehow suggest that the orcs would tax their people or bother building settlements, like you do in the Total War series, well, someone like Grimgor, Ironhide would tear you to splinters. Where's Grimgor, you might ask? Well, there's orcs in Warhammer, and then there's Grimgor, the mighty orc war chief, or war boss, my apologies, I couldn't get these messed up, who just loves battles, who engaged the dwarves in several battles and crushed them to bits, to the point that the dwarves hid in their cities because they couldn't defeat them on the field of battle. And then he got bored and marched against the Empire. Then he got bored and marched against Kislev, almost made it. The people of Kislev sent 3 different armies to try and kill him. They failed. And then they summoned Blizzard with the help of their magic, summoned blizzards with the help of their magic to slow down the Orcish army. Grumgar would still have marched on Kislev himself, but he needed his army to take it. So he marched to an abandoned dwarven city and waged war on the Skaven. Then he killed a bunch of Skaven, got bored of that, and marched against Chaos. That's the kind of person you're talking about. He doesn't give a fuck about taxation or building settlements. He would kill you if you dare suggest that. So the point I'm making here is that certain factions just wouldn't work well with that system. Like Chaos wouldn't work, Orcs wouldn't work, Skaven, you can make different economies. Like, there should be different ways, like, these factions get units, but not every faction should just be able to build settlements. Chaos is not interested in building settlements. When Chaos takes over a city, they corrupt it completely. They don't settle in it. They're there to corrupt the world for their gods, to spread chaos. That's what chaos does. And when you shouldn't just be able to take over a city as, say, Chaos or the Orcs without either enslaving or butchering the entire population. It's like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna peacefully occupy a settlement as Chaos or Orcs. That wouldn't happen, ever. It just wouldn't work. And you can just take over a settlement, start recruiting units in that settlement. There are several human factions. There's there's also various sub-factions as well inside these major factions. Like, there's 5 different Chaos factions like Chaos Undivided, and then smaller factions for each of the gods like Khorne or Nurgle anyway, that need to be taken into account. And the point I'm making here is that the traditional Total War campaign model wouldn't work well in a Warhammer game. So they would need to make significant changes to that in terms of recruitment of units. Like say for instance, as the orcs, you'd gain the ability to recruit more units depending on how well you did in war. Like there should be a currency depending on how many victories you've gotten, because that's how Grimgor gets an army. He attracts orcs with his military prowess, and that's the way it works. Orcs do trade in their teeth. So that's a form of currency, and they do fight each other. Like these are not unified factions, not completely. Obviously, there's various alliances, especially among the humans, various political paths, etc., etc. But you wouldn't trade as Chaos with the Empire. You would be marching on the Imperial capital. Diplomacy as well would need significant changes. I don't think a Total War Warhammer game would work if they kept the traditional model. And even if they made changes, I think they would have to revamp the entire fucking thing. In fact, I personally would be more in favor of a narrative-driven campaign, more linear, more focused. That's what I personally would want instead of the sandbox that Total War traditionally has, because I don't think a sandbox would work. The crucial point about Warhammer is the narrative. The narrative really does matter a lot. There's important characters in the lore, and I do want these characters to be represented well, instead of just having a random fucking guy on the battlefield using the same voice actor as other people. That's not the treatment Karl Franz, for instance, or Grimgor, or Crom the Conqueror, or any of these characters deserve to have. They deserve better. So the way I see it, they should abandon the regular campaign model or make significant changes and give us a narrative-focused campaign. Not quite completely linear. You can have a non-linear campaign, but not the sandbox. Just not the sandbox, because that wouldn't work. And for those saying that wouldn't be Total War, well, it's not Total War. It's Warhammer. You want what Creative Assembly should be making is a good Warhammer game, not a good Total War game. They haven't been able to make a good Total War game for a while now. Do you think that that's going to change anytime soon? I very much doubt it. And I personally don't want the people who have been working on a Total War series anymore near this project. So that's what I think we should get in a Warhammer Total War game. I know some people have different opinions on this. I know some people like to take for instance the dwarves and march on the elves, but that's not something that would happen in the Warhammer universe, because it goes against the lore. I mean, sure, the dwarves don't really like the elves, but they would not be marching on Ulthuan, for instance. They've got bigger fish to fry, far bigger fish to fry. Until we get to the grudges that the dwarves have against the elves, we have to march against the chaos, And a final point about this: armies should not be huge in Total War Warhammer. You shouldn't just be able to recruit huge armies right off the bat. Battles involving huge armies in the Warhammer universe are pretty rare. These are the stuff of legends. They should not happen all the fucking time. You shouldn't just be able to get the stack right off the bat. It should be, something that builds up and builds up throughout a very long campaign, and then you get to see, 1, 2, maybe 3 battles, large-scale battles. Smaller scale battles are what's the norm in Warhammer, as opposed to Total War, where you can just pump out stacks, stack after stack after stack, and that's generally what the AI does on the higher difficulties. Just keep pumping out those stacks until you just get sick and fucking tired of all the repetitive battles. And well, we'll see what they deliver, if indeed it's going to be a Total War Warhammer Fantasy game, if it's not something else. We'll see. Costin here on Serious Gaming, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video.